The miniseries Daisy Jones and the Six is based on the popular novel of the same name by Taylor Jenkins Reid, in which the fictional band Daisy Jones and the Six recounts their journey from small-time musicians to one of the most influential rock bands of all time, culminating in their sudden and unexplained breakup at the height of their popularity. I listened to the audiobook for the first time a couple weeks ago and really enjoyed it. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that I ended up listening to the whole thing in one day. I didn't plan on doing that, it just sort of happened. I started listening to it as I was taking care of some chores around the house, and a couple hours later, the chores were done, but I didn't want to stop listening. The book had gripped me. I was invested in this band and their story, and all I wanted was to find out what happened to them next. The show, on the other hand, while good enough, left something to be desired. I felt it from the very first episode, and by the last episode, it was still there. Don't get me wrong, the show isn't bad by any means. It's a fine season of television and a relatively faithful adaptation, despite a few changes here and there. There are definitely worse things to watch and worse adaptations out there. But even through all of that, I couldn't help but come out of this show and feel that something was missing, that though it got a lot of the book's events right, it ultimately failed to capture something that the book had. I thought about it for, frankly, longer than I should have, but after hours of deliberation over both the book and the show, I think I figured out what's wrong with the TV adaptation of Daisy Jones and the Six. It's form. In order to properly explain this, we need to go back and study the book. This is your official spoiler alert for both the book and the show Daisy Jones and the Six. You have been warned. Daisy Jones and the Six is a book that poses itself as non-fiction. It's a biography of sorts of the band, and its contents is to be taken as having happened in real life. The narrative of the book unfolds through interviews given by the band members and others surrounding them at the time, with the occasional contextual interjections made by the author. In fact, the book opens with a note from the author, not Taylor Jenkins Reid, but the author of the biography. This book is an attempt to piece together a clear portrait of how the renowned 1970s rock band Daisy Jones and the Six rose to fame, as well as what led to their abrupt and infamous split while on tour in Chicago on July 12, 1979. I have conducted individual interviews of current and former members of the band, as well as family, friends, and industry elite who surrounded them at the time. This book serves as the first and only time members of the band have commented on their history together. However, it should be noted that, on matters both big and small, sometimes accounts of the same event differ. The truth often lies, unclaimed, in the middle. From the very first pages of the novel, Reid establishes one of the most important elements of Daisy Jones and the Six: its subjectivity. That subjectivity is present and elevated in all aspects of the novel, from content to form. If you think about it, if Reid wanted to tell the story of an influential band's rise and sudden controversial breakup, she could have done so in a traditional narrative format. You know, something like third-person limited multi-POV, writing out the events that happened to Daisy, Billy, Graham, Karen, Warren, Eddie, Camilla, etc., the way that any other fictional novel would. But Reid didn't do that. She chose to write it as an oral history, set not during the events themselves, but decades afterwards. The story is not learn what happens to this band. The story is listen to the band describe what happened to them from their own personal perspectives. As a result, Daisy Jones and the Six's subjectivity is on full display, and in my opinion, one of the most crucial elements of the story, both in showing the interpersonal relationships and conflicts between the band members and the public's perception of the band. From very early on, we start to see differing accounts of events between different members of the band. Billy Dunn, lead singer, The Six. I was 7 when Dad left, Graham was 5. He left behind this old Silvertone guitar, and Graham and I would fight over who got to play it. Eventually, when I was about 15 or so, Mom saved up and bought Graham and I an old Strat for Christmas. Graham wanted that one, so I let him have it. I kept the Silvertone. Graham Dunn, lead guitar, The Six. I wanted the Silvertone, but I could tell it meant more to Billy, so I took the Strat. It's a tiny, simple difference in account, but so important for the book as a whole. It sets up that different members of the band perceived things differently. Billy genuinely thought Graham wanted the Strat, so he kept the Silvertone, but Graham knew how much that Silvertone meant to Billy, so he made that sacrifice and took the Strat. That's only a small example, but one of my favorite passages from the book that highlights this subjectivity perfectly comes when the band plays a show during their Numbers tour, at which Jonah Berg, a writer for Rolling Stone, is in attendance. It's a big deal for them, as this is their moment to shine in front of someone who could theoretically make or break their careers, and this is what happens. I apologize, I will be quoting fairly lengthy excerpts throughout this video, but I think it's important to do so in order to understand the point I'm trying to make. Also, the powers that be, please do not copyright this video, okay? Fair use. I'm pulling the fair use card. Please don't copyright it. If you do, I will cry. Billy. After she finished the song, I heard her say goodbye to the audience, and I thought, we could do Honeycomb now, just me and her. Graham, I was surprised to see Billy going out there. Eddie, I was sitting there with a guitar and Billy comes up to me. I said, what do you want me to play? But instead, Billy put his hand out asking for my guitar. I'm the goddamn guitarist, and he's trying to take my guitar. He said, can I borrow it, man? I wanted to say, no, you cannot borrow it, but what could I do? I'm standing up in front of thousands of people. I handed it over and Billy took it and walked right up to the mic with Daisy. I'm standing there with my dick in my hands, no reason to be on stage. I had to slink off. Billy and Daisy perform. This is what ensues after. Daisy. And then Billy said, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we are the Six. And the rest of the band came out on stage and went right into Hold Your Breath. Eddie. I came back out onto the stage and my guitar is sitting on the side there and I have to go and pick it up. And that chapped my ass. It's not enough he tells me how to do my job. He controls when we go on tour. Now he's taking my goddamn instrument from me and taking my place on stage. And he can't even bother to hand it back to me when I get back up there? Do you understand where I'm coming from? Daisy. As they were all walking out, I whispered into Billy's ear, should I leave? And he shook his head no. So I joined in, started harmonizing when I could, banging my tambourine. It was such a fun show being up there with them the whole time. Billy. I don't remember why Daisy stayed that night. I think I assumed she'd leave, but when she didn't, I thought, all right then, I guess she's staying. I mean, the whole night was a fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants kind of deal. Billy. I leaned over to Eddie between one of the songs, and I was going to thank him for earlier, but he wouldn't even look at me. I couldn't get his eye. Eddie. I was so over Billy's nice guy routine. He was an asshole, a complete and utter selfish prick. Sorry to say it, but that's how I saw it. To be honest, I still see it that way now. Billy. I finally tapped Eddie on the shoulder right before the finale. I said, thanks man, I just wanted to really give him a good show since Rolling Stone is out there. Eddie. He said he'd normally let me play, but since it was Rolling Stone, he wanted to really do it right. Graham. Look, I got it. With Billy, it was easy to feel like a second-class citizen, but how we all feel about it doesn't change the fact that people were paying money to see Billy. People liked his songs, the way he wrote them. They liked watching him up there. Billy was right to go out onto that stage and take Eddie's guitar. It wasn't respectful necessarily, it certainly wasn't flattering or nice, but it made for a better show. Billy. When we ended that song, I thought that was the best show we'd ever played. I turned back to the band and I said, great job, everybody. Warren. Eddie got really heated and he snapped, so happy to please you, boss. Billy. I should have read the situation and just backed away, but I didn't. I don't know what I said, but clearly whatever it was, I shouldn't have said it. Eddie. Billy got up close to me and said, don't be a dick to me just because you're having a bad night. And that was it for me. You know why? Because I'd had a great night. I played great that night. So screw him. And that's what I said. I said, screw you, man. And Billy said, take it down a notch, all right? Billy. I probably told him to calm down or something. Eddie. Just because something doesn't matter to Billy doesn't mean it doesn't matter to me. And I was real sick and tired of people expecting me to feel exactly Billy's way about something. Karen. Right before the lights went out, I looked at Eddie and I saw him lift the guitar off his shoulders, and I could just tell. Daisy. Eddie took his guitar and lifted it into the air. Graham. It just came smashing down. Eddie. I smashed my guitar and walked off. I instantly regretted it. It was a 68 Les Paul. Warren. The neck broke off it and Eddie just swung it and let it land on the ground and he walked off. I thought about kicking my snare just to join the fun, but it was a Ludwig. You don't go kicking a Ludwig. Daisy. It was a great show. A great show. I felt like dynamite after that show. Jonah Berg, rock journalist, Rolling Stone, 1971 to 1983. When I first came back and met the band after the Glasgow show, I was surprised at the level of camaraderie. They were out there, rocking out, smashing guitars, but backstage, everything seemed really calm. They seemed completely normal, which is weird for rock stars. But the Six was never what you expect. This one event has so many layers of subjective recollection, and it's the exact kind of thing for which the author of the biography prefaces the story. Let's break this down. There are 3 threads of conflict that highlight contradictory perspectives that are important to the shape of the narrative. Billy versus Eddie, Billy versus Daisy, and Billy and Eddie versus everyone else. Billy takes Eddie's guitar to perform with Daisy, which Eddie finds insulting. He doesn't even hand it back to Eddie afterwards, which is even more insulting. So when Billy attempts to thank him, Eddie doesn't want to hear it, leading to a significant disagreement between them. Eddie finds the whole thing demeaning, while Billy sees it as practical. Billy says he took the guitar because he wanted to give Rolling Stone a good show. Eddie says that Billy took the guitar because he wanted to do it right. Somewhere along the way, from Billy to Eddie, the message warped due to past grievances and expected behavior from each party. Billy and Daisy have different accounts as to why Daisy stayed on stage. Daisy says that she stayed because Billy told her to. Billy says that he doesn't know why Daisy stayed. This is a really important discrepancy, since Daisy staying on stage for this show was the first step in her officially joining the band, and neither Billy nor Daisy can agree on what prompted it. And of course, everyone else's perception of this night differs from what actually is going on. Karen, Warren, and Daisy witness Eddie smash his guitar and assume he's just going hard into the rock and roll aesthetic. In fact, Warren is so convinced of this that he even considers joining in. Meanwhile, Eddie is smashing his guitar out of rage at Billy. What's more is that Daisy considered this show to be amazing. She had no clue what was going on between Billy and Eddie, and that goes for Warren and potentially Karen as well. Even decades later, they don't know what really happened that night. And the cherry on top of this whole situation is that Jonah Berg also considered Eddie smashing his guitar to be rock and roll, and his experience with the band afterwards was tame and amicable, when in reality, the relationships between the band members were moments away from turning into a blowout. It's multiple angles of subjectivity that is possible due to the story's form. Sure, a similar thing could have been pulled off with traditional narrative if Reed had pivoted points of view between all the characters, but I doubt it would have been as powerful because of the second layer to this scene, and the book as a whole, that adds subjectivity. We don't know if characters are telling the truth. The very fact that the characters themselves are narrating their own stories opens up the question: is every person being 100% truthful? You can end up with multiple different accounts of the same story due to individual perception, but it can also happen if some people are withholding or twisting information in an attempt to hide their actions or make themselves look better. A great example is this little passage. Billy: I should have read the situation and just backed away, but I didn't. I don't know what I said, but clearly, whatever it was, I shouldn't have said it. Eddie: Billy got up close to me and said, "Don't be a dick to me just because you're having a bad night." I said, "Screw you, man," and Billy said, "Take it down a notch, alright?" Billy: I probably told him to calm down or something. This is so significant. It is plausible that Billy simply doesn't remember what he said. It's been decades at this point, and you can't expect every single person to remember every detail of every interaction they had during this time. But at the same time, it wouldn't be inconceivable that an event as significant as this one is one that would stick with you, even decades later. So when Billy says he doesn't remember what he said to Eddie that night, is he telling the truth? Does he genuinely not remember? Or is he lying when he says he doesn't remember so that he doesn't have to expose how much of an asshole he really was that night? You could ask the same questions of Eddie. Maybe Billy doesn't remember what he said because he actually didn't say anything too bad, and Eddie simply reacted poorly due to years of frustration he harbored towards Billy. Does Eddie really remember Billy saying those words to him? Or did Eddie maybe embellish a little in order to paint Billy as more awful than he was? It wouldn't be out of the question, especially considering that Eddie himself says that he still doesn't like Billy to this day. And now that we're questioning the integrity of these people's answers, we can begin to read even more into what they said. For example, did Billy actually try to catch Eddie's eye to thank him but wasn't able to? Or is that something he made up in an attempt to make himself look more sympathetic? Did Billy really tell Daisy to stay on stage, or did Daisy make the decision to stay and make up that Billy gave her the okay to make her seem less like she forced her way in? Billy doesn't seem to remember it happening, so did it? On the other hand, did Billy actually tell Daisy to stay on stage that night and lie to the interviewer out of a sense of ego? We don't find out the truth, and we never will. The only people who know what happened are the people involved, and even then, there isn't a guarantee that they do. Memories fade, and that is the third layer of subjectivity. The human mind is fallible. In trying to remember all these events after decades, it's only natural that some things will slip people's minds. Billy fully might have told Daisy to stay that night. He just might not remember. It's all of this additional subjectivity in the story that makes Daisy Jones and the Six so compelling, because even after you've read the whole book, there are so many instances that don't have a definite answer to them. Almost nothing about this book is black and white. People perceive things in different ways, but they can also deliberately change their stories, and their memories can fail them, and those three layers together make a story that is messy and emotional and real. The book also has an immediacy to it, an urgency created by the incredibly personal nature of it. There's no buffer between character and reader the way there might have been should it have been told in a traditional third-person narrative form. Even if it was told in first person, which frankly I don't think would work with this book, it still wouldn't have achieved the same effect that Reed did by writing Daisy Jones the way she did. Using the form of interviews makes everything personal. Again, the characters themselves are telling us their story, one that has been completely unknown until this point because everything that happened deeply affected these people's lives. That personal element, combined with the subjectivity, ties Daisy Jones and the Six together. Reed's use of interviews makes this story what it is, as you would hope and expect when using a unique form like this. Reed also takes care to ensure that the reader can feel like Daisy Jones and the Six really existed. The way she writes characters describing them, they're sensationalized the way real cultural icons are. I was particularly compelled by the description of the impact of Aurora's cover art. Karen. Daisy comes in and she's wearing cutoffs and a white tank top with no bra on, and she's got her big hoop earrings, the bangles up her arms. Her shirt was thin and white, and you can see her nipples clear as day, and she knew that, and suddenly it was crystal clear to me. This cover is going to be about Daisy's chest. Freddie Mendoza. Billy had this denim on denim look, right? And then Daisy had on a shirt that was barely a shirt, and I knew that was the photo. His denim and her tank top. They had each veered to opposite ends of the group, but I kept trying to get everyone to mix it up, and at one point I watched as Daisy leaned forward. She was looking at Billy, so I just kept snapping as Daisy was looking at Billy, and everyone else is looking at me at the camera. And then, for a split second, bam! Billy turns and looks at Daisy just as she's looking at him, and they locked eyes, and I caught it. I thought, that's good enough to be an album cover. I finally got Billy and Daisy next to each other, and their body language was like they didn't want a single atom of their bodies in contact. Billy and Daisy both started talking at the same time, and then they looked at each other again. I took a few shots, and then I zoomed in on Billy and Daisy's torsos, their chests, as they were talking to each other. They were angled in, and there was so much... The negative space between them felt alive somehow. Electric. There was so much purpose behind the not touching, right? I could tell as I was looking through the viewfinder. I knew it was a great shot. When I started developing the images, I knew the one of the band against the guardrail with Billy and Daisy looking at each other. I knew that one was great, right? But then I pulled out the best one from the shots of Billy and Daisy's torsos, and I just went, hell yeah. It's the kind of great photograph that, the moment you see it, you can't help but have an emotional reaction. He was in denim, you could see her chest. You knew who they were, even without seeing their faces. You could fill in the gaps yourself. With the clear blue sky behind them, which was framed in more or less a straight line on Billy's side, and then on Daisy's side it was curvy because it ebbed and flowed with her body. It was masculine and feminine at the same time. And then when you really looked, you could see there was something in her pocket. I didn't know what it was for sure. It looked like a vial. I was assuming for pills or powder. And it just brought it all together. It was America. It was tits. It was sex. It was drugs. It was summer. It was angst. It was rock and roll. So there it was, Billy and Daisy, their torsos on the front, and then the whole band with Billy and Daisy looking at each other on the back. A great album cover, if I do say so myself. Even better than the description of the album cover is its reception from the public upon its release. Elaine Chang, biographer, author of Daisy Jones' Wildflower. If you were a teenager in the late 70s, that cover was everything. The way Daisy Jones carried herself, the way she was in full control of her sexuality, the way she showed her chest through her shirt but it felt like it was on her own terms, it was a seminal moment in the lives of so many teenage girls. When you're talking about images in which a woman is naked, subtext is everything. And the subtext of that photo, the way her chest is neither aimed at Billy nor at the viewer, the way her stance is confident but not suggestive, the subtext isn't that Billy is trying to please you or the man she's with. The subtext isn't, my body is for you. The subtext for her body in that image, it's self-possession. The subtext is, I do what I want. That album cover is why I, as a young girl, fell in love with Daisy Jones. She just seemed so fearless. Freddie Mendoza. It's funny, when I shot the album cover, I thought it was just a gig. Now, all these years later, it's all anybody asks about. That's what happens when you do something legendary, right? Listening to that, I can fully believe that this is an iconic album cover, right up there with the likes of the Beatles' Abbey Road and Queen's Queen 2. I understand why this was as big as it was. The other element of the novel that really made this band feel real for me was the Rolling Stone article's impact and the release of the band's third album, Aurora. As Aurora releases, Jonah Berg publishes an article about how Daisy Jones and Billy Dunn absolutely despise each other, which is so incredibly juicy because of the crazy notion that two people who are at each other's throats can make music like that. It's interesting, it's exciting, it's gossip-worthy. As I was listening to the book, it was no surprise to me that the article blew up, and when Aurora was released, of course it blew up too. Rod. The same week Aurora hits the shelves, so does the Rolling Stone cover. Billy's profile shot on one side, Daisy's on the other, their noses almost touching, and it says, Daisy Jones and the Six. Are Billy Dunn and Daisy Jones rock and roll's biggest foes? Is there any headline that's going to make you want to see Daisy Jones and the Six perform live than that? There's no diamond record without the Rolling Stone article. The article was the first step in their music transcending the limits of music. It was the first step toward Aurora not only being an album, but an event. It was the last kick it needed to blast off. It's evocative and immersive. I'm convinced. It makes so much sense that this would happen, and I can make myself believe that it did. Reed knocked it out of the park with this, and it was so important that she was able to pull this off, to convince her readers, at least for the time that they were reading, that her fictional band was real. Because nothing that I said earlier about subjectivity and the story being personal would matter all that much if the band didn't feel real. The subjectivity makes the story compelling, but what makes the use of subjectivity itself compelling is that we as readers truly feel like we're getting the inside scoop on an iconic moment in history. We are getting to learn everything about these real people, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Reed used the form that she chose to its highest potential and did the work to ensure that it would stick the landing, and it did. The TV adaptation of Daisy Jones is a different story. From the beginning, adapting this story was going to be strange because of the form Reed chose. For a novel, the idea of a number of characters sitting down and narrating this story to you directly works fine enough, and it really works in audio format. But television is a visual medium. You can't have the entire series being the characters sitting down and delivering the story directly into the camera. That would be a bad series. So the show made the decision to change up the form. I don't think changing the form of a story is inherently bad. Again, it was kind of inevitable with something like Daisy Jones because the original form is not suited to a visual medium at all. Daisy Jones' situation actually reminds me of another show whose adaptation I think was also in a similar boat, and that show is Fleabag. Fleabag is a comedy series created by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and if you haven't seen it, do that right now. I don't even care if you finish this video, because Fleabag is that good. The story is about Waller-Bridge's unnamed character, who we all just call Fleabag. It follows her as she tries to navigate all the aspects of adult life: work, relationships, friendships, family, and sort of fails at all of them. Fleabag is kind of a loser of a character. She's an asshole, and her life is always on the verge of falling apart. Fleabag originally started as a stage play performed by Waller-Bridge. In the play, Waller-Bridge narrates the story to the audience with the occasional dramatized interjection.
I snort laugh at myself, and then catch the eye of an attractive-looking man. Oh. Well, he is attractive and holding his paper to about here. It all gets a bit rodent-y from the nose down, but the tube pulls into Tottenham Court Road and we both stand up at the same time. I could vomit. He says to me, "Well, this doesn't happen very often, does it?" Oh. I give a horribly giggly, "No, sir." I suppose it's quite rare.
90% of this story is purely narration, and it works because both Waller-Bridge's writing and performance are incredibly strong. It's formally similar to Daisy Jones in that way. Both rely on characters narrating to the audience the story of their lives. And similar to Daisy Jones, a TV adaptation of Fleabag would have to change its form. Again, you can't just have someone sit down and tell a story and call it a TV series. It doesn't work. So Waller-Bridge changed the form. The TV show is completely dramatized. What Fleabag would have narrated to us in the play is shown in real time in the series. But one of the most interesting elements of the show are the constant fourth wall breaks in which Fleabag speaks directly to the camera, often telling us her inner thoughts. So why did changing the form of Fleabag work? Well, because even with the changes, it maintains what made the play so compelling: Fleabag's complete candidness with the audience. Fleabag is herself with the audience in ways she isn't with the rest of the characters. We are the only ones to truly see her ego, her narcissism, her unsavory qualities, and how she views herself, other characters, and the world.
I took half an hour trying to look nice, and I ended up looking amazing. Just one of those days. Gorgeous, fresh-faced, new top, little bit sexy, on my way to open my cafe, and oh, God. Yeah, you check me out, chub, because it's never gonna happen. Oh, God, he can't believe how attractive I am. Kind of worried I'm gonna make a sex offender out of the poor guy. Here we go. This better be good. Here we go.
Walk of shame.
Fleabag's connection with the audience is always kept at the forefront. Seriously, she can't go 3 sentences without breaking the fourth wall. We are part of the story from beginning to end, which maintains the original narration/connection with the audience that Fleabag the play had. In addition, Fleabag's fourth wall breaks serves the content. Her constant dialogue with the audience can be construed as a sort of coping mechanism she's developed in order to deal with the death of her best friend and her own personal guilt attached to it. Waller-Bridge works it into the story, and she's consistent with it, and she even uses it to play with characters and the connections they share. Season 2 of Fleabag is a love story, as Fleabag herself lets us know from the very first scene.
This is a love story.
The season follows Fleabag and this hot priest as they form a much-needed connection with each other. The first episode of this season features one of my favorite uses of fourth wall breaks in the entire show.
No one's asked me a question in 45 minutes.
So what do you do?
It's amazing. His perfectly timed interjection shows just how synchronized their minds are, even if they don't know it yet. Just as she's pleased with the fact that no one has talked to her in half an hour, the priest also realizes that she's been left out of the conversation for a significant amount of time and wants to rectify that. He brings her back into reality. I love it so much. Also, the first episode of Season 2 of Fleabag is one of my favorite episodes of television ever. I am not exaggerating. The writing is flawless. The performances are stellar. It is endlessly rewatchable, despite the majority of its runtime taking place during a single dinner at a restaurant. It is brilliant, and if I am ever able to write something even a third as good as this episode, I will die happy. Season 2 also sees the priest start to realize that Fleabag goes somewhere, aka she talks to the camera.
We lost a week.
What was that?
What?
Where did you just go?
What?
You just went somewhere. There.
He's a bit annoying, actually.
What is that?
What?
That thing that you're doing. It's like you disappear.
What?
What are you not telling me?
Nothing.
Tell me what's going on underneath there.
Nothing.
Tell me. Come on.
No.
You can tell me.
Nothing.
Ah,
Nothing.
what are you doing?
No, stop being so churchy.
As their bond deepens, he notices this thing about her that no one else in the show does, going to show just how much he sees and understands her. Even better is the thematic implications of Fleabag's fourth wall breaks. Even though Fleabag is candid with the audience, she's still not fully honest. As you keep watching, you get the sense that Fleabag is still performing to the audience to a certain extent. Sometimes she'll tell us her feelings about something, but when that thing actually happens, she reacts in a completely different way. For example, in Season 1, she becomes convinced that the man she's seeing is falling in love with her. She implies to us that she's very nonchalant about this, and that she sees it as more a burden than something to celebrate. But when she and the man talk and he reveals that he's actually in love with someone else, Fleabag gets this sort of sad emptiness to her. From what she told us, we'd think she'd be happy about this. She doesn't have this burden. But she's not. In fact, while we as the audience see a candid side of Fleabag, she is never directly vulnerable with us. She's vulnerable with the real people in her lives, which plays into one of Fleabag's themes. Fleabag is desperate for connection with other people, and if we do consider her fourth wall breaks to be a result of her trauma, then her being vulnerable with real people instead of with us is her progress in self-healing. Fleabag uses its unique form with such purpose, taking a story that was initially 90% narration and successfully dramatizing it in a way that doesn't lose anything the original had. In fact, it even adds to it. Phoebe Waller-Bridge was well aware of what her story was, what made it special, and how to use form to translate that. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Daisy Jones and the Six. The formal changes to the show are often more detrimental than they are helpful. The show does maintain the use of interviews, changing them from audio to video, which obviously makes sense for television. However, the majority of the story is told in the 70s, in real time, in a traditional narrative form. The story goes from being 90% narration to 90% dramatization, which means that suddenly, the story went from being listen to the band describe what happened to them from their own personal perspectives to learn what happens to this band. In this form, Daisy Jones the show loses what made the book so compelling, its subjectivity. There's very little subjectivity in the show because the events are presented to us through an objective lens. The camera isn't a person. It's not fallible or biased the way people are, the way the characters are as they tell their stories in the book. If we see something happen in the show, then that is what happened. There is no room for debate here. If we go back to the example I gave from the book, the scene where Eddie smashes his guitar, the implications of it are completely different in the show. Now, the scene isn't directly adapted into the show, its beats are kind of split between a couple of different scenes, but I'm going to focus on the scene in the final episode, where Billy shouts out all the members of the band. Before this moment, Eddie implies to Billy that he slept with his wife Camilla, which is another layer of tension between these two characters when they perform. On stage, Billy shouts out the other members of the band with awe and affection, but when he gets to Eddie, he gets it over with blandly and quickly. But understanding how this seems, he tries again, and gives Eddie the same awe he gave the other members, maybe even more so.
On bass, that's Eddie Roundtree. All right, wait, let's try that again, shall we? The master of the low-end hammer. The man, the face who keeps pace on the bass. The groove layer, the four-string slayer, it's Eddie Demetrius Roundtree.
As Eddie leans in to thank him, Billy says,
Go fuck yourself. You're done.
The bare bones of the scene are the same in the book, layer upon layer of disrespect between these two characters leading to heated words exchanged. But unlike in the book, we know exactly what happens here. We know Eddie pissed Billy off, and we know Billy basically kicks Eddie out of the band mid-performance. There is no question here of what happened. All the layers of subjectivity present in the book are nullified in the show. We're not wondering how each person is perceiving the situation. We're not wondering if anyone is lying or simply forgot this moment. It's just presented to us as fact, and it makes this moment less intriguing. The same can be said for so many other moments in the show. In an earlier episode, the Six plays a festival, and Daisy accompanies them so she can join their performance of Look at Us Now. Billy tells her that they're playing the song Fourth, but Daisy comes out on stage after their first song, essentially forcing them to play Look at Us Now early, and she stays for the rest of the set, all of which pisses Billy off. That is presented as fact. Billy gives Daisy an order, Daisy ignores it, they both get pissed at each other. Again, there's nothing to speculate on here. We don't watch this scene and wonder, did Daisy come out early, or were they always going to play Look at Us Now second? Did Billy tell Daisy to stay on stage afterwards, or did Daisy force her way in there? None of that is happening in our brains because what the show depicts to us is objective fact. It upsets me and hurts the story because the layers of contradiction and speculation, aka the most interesting aspect of the story, that are present in the book are stripped away, leaving Daisy Jones and the Six as what is essentially a biopic. Biopics, particularly musical biopics, tend to be mid. They all follow the same formula just by nature. Small-time artists start making music, gain more popularity, get signed. Usually a lot of emphasis is put on the making of the song or record that launched them into fame. They tour, there might be some infidelity. Since most of these biopics take place during the 70s and 80s, there's usually drug use, and they end up on top of the world despite the personal internal struggles they may be facing. They're all the same, and unfortunately this is exactly what Daisy Jones and the Six becomes. Everything I mentioned happens in Daisy Jones. The book repackaged this familiar story in a new form that made it fresh. The show, on the other hand, undid that repackaging and ended up presenting it in the exact same form that every other mediocre biopic is, and it's kind of disappointing. Broey Deschanel made a great video about the mediocrity of biopics, so definitely check it out if you haven't seen it already. Though biopics usually end up mediocre, they managed to survive on the audience's knowledge that the people in them were real. Even though no biopic has ever blown me away, I still can't help but feel a sense of awe when I watch recreations of these artists' biggest shows. Not necessarily because of the scenes themselves, but because of the knowledge that something as extraordinary as this actually did happen. Women really did become hysterical over Elvis's performances. Queen really did play one of the best live shows in history at Wembley. These things happened, these people did them, and that alone is enough to carry these biopics despite their faults. That is not true of Daisy Jones and the Six, because, well, Daisy Jones and the Six is not real. They're a fictional band, so the show can't even be carried by the audience's awe of these events. What we're seeing didn't happen. As previously discussed, Taylor Jenkins Reid put a lot of work into making this band feel real. That's a big reason why this story works. It's why the use of interviews is so compelling. Reading or listening to this book genuinely feels like you're learning a secret history of pop culture icons. The interview portions, while present, are actually used what feels like sparingly. On top of that, presenting the story to us in a traditional narrative form eliminates the personal touch that makes it feel real, and it ends up just feeling like fiction. Regular biopics are taking a non-fiction story and making it a fictional narrative. Daisy Jones the show is taking a fictional story presenting itself as non-fiction and making it fictional again, and it just doesn't work. The second you remind the audience that the band isn't real, the immersion is lost and you have failed in your adaptation. And it doesn't help that the show never really brings the band to life the way Reid did with the book. The Rolling Stone article doesn't feel like a huge cultural moment, probably because the episode in which it was released was the episode we spend in Greece. You can't showcase how much of an impact the article had on American pop culture if we're never actually in America, and we never see the American public reacting to it. Similarly, Aurora doesn't feel like the iconic album that it's supposed to be. I may be misremembering this, but I don't think we ever actually see the final album cover in the show. I mean like front and back with the title, everything. And it also doesn't help that the image they used isn't as iconic as it's described in the book, at least in my opinion. I mean, I kind of get why they changed it. Titties on the cover might have been difficult to slide by in film, but even still, the image we get wasn't sensationalized. The band just doesn't feel as real in the show, and once again, if the band doesn't feel real, the entire thing fails. I apologize for this section of the video feeling kind of messy. It's like that because it feels messy in my head. I'll just give you the main ideas again so we're all on the same page. The formal change employed by the show was detrimental because 1. The story loses its subjective lens and personal touch, 2. As a result, it ends up feeling like a regular mediocre biopic, and 3. It ends up being even less successful than real biopics because the band isn't real. Okay, so now that we've outlined why this form doesn't work, let's talk about the solution. As I was considering this, my first thought was that maybe Daisy Jones and the Six is simply not adaptable, or at least not adaptable in a way that would retain everything that makes the story special. Like I said, the book's interview format was successful in telling the story, and you can't adapt that directly. But I didn't like this answer, because I like to think that most stories are adaptable to other mediums, given the right decisions are made. Unless it's something like the movie Searching, which very obviously hinges on visuals to unfold its story, or some great literary work with an unconventional narrative that would be incredibly difficult to translate, I think that most stories can be adapted, and something simple yet powerful like Daisy Jones absolutely can be. And besides, Fleabag was in a similar boat, and that story was adapted incredibly. So I did a lot of thinking very late at night. The insomnia really popped off for a while there, and I think I figured out how to adapt Daisy Jones in a way that would retain everything that made it successful. Here goes. Daisy Jones and the Six should have been a mockumentary. And the more I thought about this, the more it made sense to me, and the more I wished this is what they had done with the story. Mockumentaries are fake documentaries. They're fictional stories told in a documentary format to evoke the sense that the story is real. In short, they're fictional stories presenting themselves as non-fiction. Sounds like another story I know of. Daisy Jones and the Six could have used this form very successfully. Retain the interviews in present day, but instead of the events of the 70s being told in a traditional narrative form, have the 70s be told through found footage taken during that time. And you might be thinking, well, who's taking the videos? And I would say, Camilla. Of course it would be Camilla, at least near the beginning. The show already turned her into the Six's photographer in their early years. It wouldn't be out of the question for her to be a videographer as well. There's literally a scene in the early episodes of the show where she films Billy in a cute home video kind of way. Camilla could have captured the band's early years, and as they get bigger, others will want to film them for their own purposes. Reporters trying to get a story, fans at their shows. I wouldn't be surprised if the label itself had someone follow them around with a camera, especially after the release of Look at Us Now. That song was the label's first #1 hit in years. They would know that Daisy Jones and the Six was going places, and they might want to capitalize off that themselves. In 1965, a 23-year-old Bob Dylan did a US tour which was captured on film by director D.A. Pennebaker. What resulted was the 1967 documentary titled Bob Dylan, Don't Look Back. This documentary embodies what Daisy Jones and the Six could have been. It's candid and raw, it captures events as they unfolded, and it was made likely due to Bob Dylan's significant impact on American folk music, and even captured the very beginning of his generic shift from folk to rock. It's not inconceivable that someone would want to make a documentary on Daisy Jones and the Six, given their huge impact. So, here's how I would have done it. In the early years, when they're still nobodies, Camilla films the Six, and Daisy either films herself or Simone does. Simone is also up and coming at the time, so maybe she wants to document her own work and Daisy is featured. After they gain success and Daisy joins the band, the label allows a filmmaker to capture the process of writing their third album and go on tour with them. The show could also employ footage taken by other people, like I said earlier, from press conferences, fans, what have you. A simple formal change like this solves the problems the show, as it exists now, has. In a mockumentary format, the story becomes subjective again. Now, the camera is consequential. When characters are aware that they're being filmed, they may act differently. Let's return to the scene where Billy kicks Eddie out of the band. Say we get this footage from a fan who filmed parts of their performance. In this footage, all we see is Billy praises the rest of the band members, his first and second try to praise Eddie, then Billy leaning in to say something to Eddie. We don't know what Billy said, because the fan's camera can't pick up on it. During the interviews in present day, Billy says he doesn't remember what he said to Eddie, but Eddie says he remembers perfectly, and that Billy told him that he's out. Suddenly, this scene is subjective again. Billy's saying one thing, Eddie's saying something else. We don't know who's right here. We don't know if they perceived the situation differently, or if one of them is lying, or if their memories are failing them. And most importantly, the show will never clarify it for us. It's the most real way to present it, similar to how the book did. We as the audience will never actually know the truth of that night. It's left up to speculation. And the more I think about it, the more I like this form. Nearly every scene can be successfully translated into mockumentary form. Take the press conference, for example. There are absolutely going to be cameras in that room. The camera pans from Daisy to Billy, seated at opposite ends of the table, being very snarky with each other, but in the end, having their answers softened by PR and media training. But after the band leaves, say one reporter's camera is still rolling, and they're just able to capture Daisy and Billy arguing where they think there's no one to see them. Take the scene where the Six plays a festival and Daisy disobeys Billy. When Daisy comes on stage after their first song to play Look at Us Now, in their present interviews, Daisy could say Billy told her to do so and that she should stay, while Billy says he doesn't know why she stayed. A mockumentary format can also enhance the conflicts between characters. Take this confrontational scene from Don't Look Back.
Hey, you better tell me, man. If somebody don't tell me who did it, you're all gonna get the fuck out of here and never come back. Now, who did it? I don't care who did it, man. I just want to know who did it. Hey, no, come on, listen, man. I've heard it 1,000 times, man. Listen, I know 1,000 cats that look just like you, man. Talk just like you.
Oh, fuck off. Wow. You're a big noise, you know?
Man, I know it, man. I know I'm a big noise. I'm bigger noise than you, man.
I'm a small noise.
Right.
I'm a small cat.
That's right.
Listen, if I'd have thrown a...
Hey, you're anything you say you are, man. You say you're a small... You're nothing.
I'm nothing.
I believe you.
Nothing.
I believe you, man.
Boys.
Listen,
Boys.
Bobby Dylan.
You know,
You're a
could we
big
have a drink
international
over
noise,
here?
you know?
Boys.
Right.
I'm nothing.
Right.
I didn't throw any fucking glass in the street.
You don't even necessarily need to know what they're arguing about in the scene to still feel its impact. Watching this feels like I'm watching something personal and intimate. It's kind of uncomfortable. It feels like a moment you shouldn't really be seeing, a moment that feels seconds away from blowing up into something bigger and worse. Now imagine this style applied to any of the arguments in Daisy Jones and the Six. Imagine Eddie telling Billy that he slept with Camilla. Imagine Daisy getting the band to vote on whether or not they want to add Regret Me to the album against Billy's wishes. Imagine Rod trying to placate both Eddie and Billy after Billy took his guitar. Imagine Billy and Nikki going head-to-head over Daisy's drug use. It could have been so personal and immersive and uncomfortable. It could have been everything that it should have been. Everywhere the show fell short in a traditional narrative format, it can thrive in a mockumentary format. Now, I will admit that some events of the story will be more difficult to translate into a mockumentary format, namely events that there might not have been cameras around. For example, the scene where Teddy takes Billy to the hospital after the birth of his daughter. Billy refuses to go inside as he's incredibly high, and he doesn't want to meet his daughter in such a state. So Teddy takes him to rehab instead. Logically, there probably wouldn't be anyone else in the car aside from Teddy and Billy, and I doubt that Teddy would ever allow anyone to film Billy in this state. But where there's a will, there's a way. I'm sure if it was given some thought, it would be possible to figure out a logical way to include this. Maybe Camilla, in her hospital room, was filming her daughter, and she hears the car pull up. She turns the camera to outside the window, where she captures Billy get out of the car, then get back in, and the car driving away. Billy's present-day interview could shed some more light on his perspective from that night. Or there could be a secondary camera angle recovered from that night that's closer to Billy and Teddy, say the hospital CCTV footage. Then we could actually hear the conversation that took place between Billy and Teddy. Did CCTV have audio in the 70s? I don't know. What I'm saying is that it is possible to put these moments in a mockumentary format. It would just take some thought. Another scene in a similar situation that comes to mind is Daisy's overdose. Again, this isn't as easy to make into a mockumentary format, but it's not impossible. For example, say Daisy and Nikki are getting high in their rooms and they decide to film the night. It's not inconceivable. They're having fun and they're high, and people have done weirder things while high. Maybe they set up the camera somewhere, like on the vanity or something. Simultaneously, say that the filmmaker is with Billy and Teddy in his room as Billy decides he wants to kick Daisy out of the band. Billy storms over to Daisy's room, the filmmaker following him. When he knocks on the door, Nikki answers. He doesn't open the door very far, and he has a decidedly suspicious air around him. When Nikki refuses to get Daisy, Billy barges his way in and sees Daisy unconscious in the shower. At this point, the filmmaker, realizing how utterly messed up the situation is, stops filming. But we cut to the footage captured by the camera that Daisy and Nikki set up, and we see this whole scene play out in a single stationary shot. We see Billy get in the shower with Daisy, panicked and sobbing, thinking that she's dying. We see Teddy call an ambulance. We see Nikki packing up his stuff as Billy shouts at him. And of course, the filmmaker themselves would have to be a character in this scene, since they're here but they've stopped filming. They're also trying to help. I think having it be a stationary long take would add an element of realism and increase the anxiety. Sure, we'd have to sacrifice some close-ups of Billy and Daisy's emotions, but I think with competent performers, which we do have here, and a competent director, it would still be powerful, even without close-ups. Some other scenes would be very difficult to do. Karen telling Graham she's pregnant and their big blow-up after she gets rid of it, for example. I've thought about it for a while, still can't figure out a way to pull it off, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a way. The world is full of better writers than me, and I'm confident that they would be able to figure it out. In the end, what I'm trying to say is that form matters, and Daisy Jones and the Six epitomizes that. Taylor Jenkins Reid was so mindful when crafting her original story, and she chose a form that would give the story layers, make it dynamic, lend it aspects that others of its kind don't have, and keep it fresh despite it being familiar. Her ability to make the band feel real, her use of subjectivity, and the personal touch to the story are all great, and sadly, Daisy Jones the show loses all of it, simply because of the form they chose. I want to reiterate that Daisy Jones and the Six isn't a bad show. It's enjoyable enough for what it is, and again, you could definitely watch worse things. But the show to me serves as wasted potential. They had everything else. Great performances, competent writing, and original music that's actually pretty damn good. If they had just chosen the right form, Daisy Jones and the Six could have been so unique and memorable, just like the band itself.